And welcome to Thursdays with Charlie. It's the 23rd of July, 2020, and this is our 12th episode. We've actually done this for 12 weeks now. Looking forward to doing many, many more and getting some ideas for other shows as well. So I think we'll have a good time. Last week we mentioned, let us know where you're watching us from, and several people have done that, letting us know the cities and states and parts of the world where they're watching from. And so far, our farthest is in Germany. I don't remember the town right away, but a couple is watching us from Germany, our Thursday show. So we've become an international sensation, sort of. Our reservation system continues to work. We appreciate your patience with that as we go through it and making the reservations every Thursday or Friday by calling us at 702-298-0440 and reserving a space at one of those weekend masses. So far, the 4 p.m. on Saturday and the 8 a.m. on Sunday continue to fill up, but we always have had room at the 6 p.m. and at the 10 a.m. and 12 noon on Sundays. So please look forward to seeing you. If you feel comfortable coming, we would love to have you. If you're more comfortable with our video mass, we're very grateful to you for being part of our virtual congregation. Last week, I also mentioned donations for the Father Garces Center. I mentioned that at the Masses, and so far we have received more than 70 responses to that, which is really very, very good, and we look forward to many, many more coming in, and we're grateful for all your donations to make our Garces Center possible. If you have a chance and you're out driving, the building exterior is up, and it looks really beautiful. It complements the church building very nicely, and it looks very good on that side of the campus. So we encourage you to drive by and take a look at it. And also, I should mention, our church is open from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m., Mondays through Fridays. So if you would want to come in for private prayer, we just ask that you have your mask on. We might ask to take your temperature in the office as you go in, and then you're welcome to pray privately in our church. We know that that's something that's been missed during this COVID virus. Also, I want to mention one of the volunteers at the Colorado River Food Bank tested positive for the virus this past week. So the Colorado River Food Bank has been closed for this week. Hopefully they'll be able to reopen soon. They are all going to be tested. They've done a massive cleaning on the food bank, and hopefully this is a one-time occurrence, and they'll be able to get back in the business of supporting all those in our area who need their services. I'm very proud to mention that we are one of the 12 rural parishes of the Diocese of Las Vegas, and at the beginning of July I did something that's never been done before. I sent out a letter to all of the parishioners of all of the 12 rural parishes around our state, and it's been wonderful getting the responses from the rural parishioners, especially those in the outlying areas. This week I received a beautiful email from a woman who lives in Baker, Nevada. It's up in the wilds, and Baker, Nevada does not have a Catholic church, but there are about 12 or 15 Catholic families who live in Baker. And they've been able to arrange with Sacred Heart Parish in Ely that years ago, one of the nuns who was there at the school would bring communion out once a month, and they would have a gathering. They're about 90 miles from Ely, Nevada. And then they were able to arrange that a priest would go out once a month and they would have Mass actually out there. And they were able to work an arrangement with a little tiny country Protestant church so that the Catholics could have their services in there once a month on a Sunday. It's a beautiful story, and they sent some wonderful pictures, and it's something that I was totally unaware of, the fact that we actually have sort of a mission in Baker. It's an extension of Sacred Heart Parish in Ely, Nevada. And I think I mentioned one of the weekday masses this week that I had been working on the book on the rural parishes, and I'm trying still to come up with a good title. The original title I had for it was, since the 12 parishes kind of revolve around the city of Las Vegas, I was going to name it the Corona of Las Vegas. But given present circumstances, I figured that's not a good idea, and the bishop totally agreed with me on that. He said, change the name. So since I'm getting such wonderful responses from the rural parishes, I'm thinking the book might have a name like In Their Own Words, as I tell the story of the rural parishes. I'm definitely looking forward to finding out more about them, seeing more pictures, getting out to visit more of them, and tell their story. One of the people I've been in contact with is the historian or the archivist of the Diocese of Salt Lake City in Utah. Strange as it may seem, back in the early days, back in the 1800s, there were some attraction, some priests provided, some services provided to the area that was the territory of Nevada by Salt Lake City. And so I'm going to go over with their archivist on what might be available in their records about the early days about our area. One of the nice things I learned about Baker is that the Catholics, those 12 or 15 families there in Baker, got together and they were able to arrange for an altar to be given to the little church where they were able to meet. And so it's kind of a unique and beautiful situation that an altar in a Protestant church in Baker, Nevada, was actually provided through the generosity of Catholics in the area of Baker, Nevada. So we're learning more and more about their particular story of faith out in Baker and out in the wilds of our rural areas. The more I learn about it, the more interested I become, and it certainly is a beautiful history, and we are going to write it, and everybody will get to share in it because we're all part of it. We're all part of the history of the Catholic faith in our beautiful state of Nevada and our beautiful area of the Southwest. Now, last week on the show, we talked a little bit about becoming a saint and the process by which it is done. It's now kind of an official process with regulations in the church, but in the early days, most of the saints were martyrs. That's pretty much how you became a saint. You gave your life for the faith, and the people in your local area kind of acclaimed you and said you're worthy of remembering and following your example and listening to looking at your words, what they remembered about you. It was only later on that people began to think of other people as saints who didn't die as a martyr. They were saints because of something they had written. They were saints because of their holy lives that they led, because of things they did encouraging others in the faith. And so we had saints who were not martyrs, but they were called confessors. They professed the faith. They were doctors of the faith. They wrote great things about the faith. Some of them were priests, some of them were religious brothers and sisters, some of them were lay people, some were old people, some were young people, some were merely children, and we honored them. And now the process by which a person becomes a saint that I mentioned last week is, first thing you have to do is you have to die. We don't declare someone a saint until after their death, and it's normally 5-year waiting period after their death before they can be declared a servant of God. This is the step on the way to sainthood. For some people, that pathway has happened almost immediately, as in the case of Pope John Paul II, immediately following his death. In case of Mother Teresa, immediately following her death, she was declared a servant of God. It was rather quick and rather easy to see that these people were holy and worthy of imitating, and so their process of canonization began really quickly. But there were others whose process did not begin quite so quickly or quite so easily. One of the ones that I like to reference is a woman named Catherine Doherty. Catherine Doherty died in 1985, but she didn't become a servant of God in the church's role of leading to sainthood for another 15 years until 2000. Catherine Doherty founded a community mainly of lay people, but of others as well, religious priests and sisters and brothers also, in Canada, in Commemoraire, Ontario. And it was named Madonna House. You may have heard about it. But Catherine Doherty was a Russian woman who came over, married a man with the Irish last name, and she founded Madonna House as a place where Catholic Christians could go and live in a communal life, kind of imitating the life of the early church. Catherine Doherty has not risen beyond the process of being a servant of God, but at least she's made it to that state, and hopefully the church will advance her further. I have a particular devotion or connection with Catherine Doherty because in her many books and her many writings, she wrote so many things that I like to remember. And one of my favorite quotations from Catherine Doherty is, "I wouldn't like to have lived without ever having disturbed anyone." I used to have that on my business card. I wouldn't like to have lived without ever having disturbed anyone. I think it's kind of a nice way to look at life, that we're going to go through life and sometimes we're going to be that piece of information or that person who spurs someone else on to do something. And so I do like Catherine Doherty for that. If you ever get a chance to read about Madonna House in Ontario, it's worth reading about. The community still exists even years now after her death. Other people who have been declared servants of God after their death, Father Edward Flanagan, who founded Boys Town in Nebraska, he died in 1948, but he was only named a servant of God, started on the path to canonization in 2012. And they're investigating his life and the work he did in Nebraska with Boys Town. Certainly a well-known American figure. Walter Czizak was a Jesuit priest in Russia. He died in 1984, and it was in 1990, 6 years later, that he was declared a servant of God. So he's also on his path to canonization. There are many, many people throughout the centuries who have made various levels on this way to canonization. Some have gone all the way through, some are still in the process. The third step is to be declared venerable. So after having been a servant of God, after having looked at your writings, your life, what's known about you, sometimes interviewing people who knew you if that's possible, the Pope can declare you venerable, worthy of veneration, worthy of being looked at, remembered. The founder of the Knights of Columbus, Father Michael McGivney, was declared venerable in 2008. And so the Knights have a chance that their founder, Father Michael McGivney, who died in the 1800s, would be declared a saint at some future date. Archbishop Fulton Sheen was declared venerable in 2012. He died in 1979, but he made it to the rank of venerable in 2012. Father Patrick Peyton, the founder of the Family Rosary Crusade, who died in the 1940s, was declared venerable in 2017. Father Peyton is famous for that quote, "The family that prays together stays together." It's a beautiful quote, a beautiful American quote of religion that I think we should remember him for. The family that prays together stays together. Pope Pius XII, who died in in the 1930s, I believe, late 30s, made it to the status of venerable in 2009. He was the Pope who guided us. He died in the 1940s. He was the Pope who guided us through World War II, being the Pope in a very difficult time in the Vatican City's history and certainly the history of Europe and the world. The final stage before canonization is a person would be declared blessed. In order to be declared blessed, a person who has been venerable, there has to be one miracle worked. Usually it is a medical miracle that somebody is cured through invoking the intercession of the person who is venerable. And then they would be investigated, usually investigated by not only priests and religious, but by medical doctors. And usually it comes out that there is no human way we could see this person could be cured except through intervention of God. And so that saint whose intervention was used to ask God to intervene, the Pope can raise that person to the ranks of blessed. Pope Paul VI, who died in 1978, was raised to the rank of blessed in 2014. Pope Pius IX, who died in 1878, was raised to the ranks of blessed only in the year 2000. And probably a long-running one, which I find very interesting, Pope Urban II, who died in 1099, was named a blessed in 1881. He has never gone on to be canonized as a saint, but nearly 800 years after his death, he finally is arrived at the church as saying there's been a miracle and he's been blessed, and maybe someday he will be declared a saint. Now, the final step is canonization as a saint. And that would take another miracle, again, usually medical. Someone is cured, that there's no human means that we can see why this cure should have taken place. And once that miracle is attested to, the church accepts it, the Pope can set a date for canonization for that person. Some of the people we've seen canonized in recent years, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Mother Teresa became a saint. Certainly her work with the poor, establishing the missionaries of charity, all the beautiful things she said about human life and doing something beautiful for God, certainly all contributed to her being an example worthy of following. If you ever have a chance to read anything about Mother Teresa's life, it is a beautiful story of a person who searched for God and wanted to do what God wanted, and then was willing to give her life over and do whatever it was that God wanted, no matter how simple it may have seemed. Cardinal John Henry Newman of England, was recently declared a saint in the past several years. Cardinal Newman was a Protestant minister who converted to Catholicism in the 1800s as part of what's called the Oxford movement. And he was declared a saint. He rose to the ranks of cardinal in the Catholic Church in the 1880s and died in 1890. He was recently declared a saint. And Pope John Paul II has also been declared a saint in recent years. Many people are still alive who knew Pope John Paul II and can attest to not only his holiness, but the good he accomplished in the world, the people he influenced. There's a whole generation of young people who are basically Catholic because the example of John Paul II, the hope he gave to the world, was so good and so valuable and so influential in their living out their lives as Catholics. Other things we can look at with saints is we can look at patron saints. Some people who are declared as saints are associated with particular areas of the world, particular countries. So, for instance, it's very easy if I were to ask you who the patron saint of Ireland is, I think most people would readily respond, well, it's St. Patrick, and that's known the world over. But he's not the only one who's a patron of Ireland. There's St. Columba, who's also a patron of Ireland, and St. Bridget of Kildare are also considered national patrons. So Patrick is not alone in being the patron saint of Ireland. Here in the United States, the bishops decided many, many decades ago that Mary would be our patron saint, the mother of Jesus, but under the particular title of the Immaculate Conception. That's why in December, on December the 8th, the celebration of the Immaculate Conception is considered to be a holy day of obligation for us in the United States, because she's our national patron. In Canada, the mother of Mary is considered to be the national patron, St. Anne, but she's also joined by St. Joseph and the North American martyrs, Jesuit priests and laymen who were put to death in the early days of the church in Lower Canada and in upstate New York in the early days of the missionary activity there. Then we get to other countries. Mexico, obviously, Our Lady of Guadalupe is considered the patron there. They also have St. Joseph as one of their patrons as well. Then we get to professions. There are all sorts of professions, jobs in our world, and they have patron saints that over the years have developed. A good example, patron saint for actors, those who are in the acting profession, is St. Genesius of Rome, who was apparently an actor. Patron saint of firefighters, firemen and women, St. Florian, who I believe comes to us from Germany, but was remembered as the patron saint of all those in firefighters. Most people know the patron saint of police is St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. And certainly in these days when police are going through so much turmoil because of the unrest in our country, we should pray for our police forces, all those in law enforcement, and certainly invoke St. Michael to help over there. There are patron saints for other professions. Patron saint of postal workers is St. Gabriel. St. Gabriel, the angel who brought the message to Mary that she was to be the mother of God, has developed into the patron saint for all those who are postal workers. And then there's patron saints of various activities and thoughts like that. For instance, St. Peregrine is considered the patron saint of those undergoing treatment for cancer. St. Peregrine, known there. There's even beautiful prayer cards with some very beautiful, powerful prayers. I guess there's an old Italian custom. People remember St. Anthony, the patron saint for finding lost objects. St. Anthony, please come around. Something is lost and cannot be found. And I don't know about you, but when I've lost something, I usually make St. Anthony my last resort, but he usually comes through for me, even as the last one. Where did I put my glasses? Where did I put my phone? And eventually, when I get tired of looking, I just give up and, St. Anthony, help. And I have to admit, he has come through for me. I'm sitting here with my phone next to me and my glasses on, basically because St. Anthony. There's patron saints for teenagers. Maria Goretti is the patron who's there. There's patron saints for young boys, especially high school and college age. Aloysius Gonzaga. There's all sorts of ones. If you should ever be interested, if you go online and you can look up the patron saint for virtually any activity, any disease, any occupation that you might think of. And it's fun. It's kind of a rabbit hole to go down some nights on the computer, but it's a beautiful one. You start learning things about the saints and why they're connected with particular occupations, why they're connected with particular countries. I mean, I won't even get into St. Nicholas being the inspiration for Santa Claus throughout the world, and just about everybody knows that. And of course, perhaps the most local patron saints that we have are the patron saints of our own names, those people whom we are honoring or are honored in our lives because we're named sort of after them. In my own life, I'm named after my father, ultimately, but if you go back, the name Charles goes back to St. Charles Borromeo, a young man in Italy back in the 1500s who had the fortune of growing up. His uncle was the Pope, and so the Pope made him a cardinal before the age of 21. And Charles Borromeo, to his credit, decided, well, if he was going to be a cardinal, he might as well be a good one. And so he studied and became a priest after he became a cardinal. And then he decided if he was going to be a priest and a cardinal, he should be doing something for the church. So he became one of the great reforming bishops of the 1500s, and as much association with the Council of Trent and putting its decrees into activities and life in Europe. And my other patron, my middle name is Benedict, and so St. Benedict, the founder of monasteries, the founder of the monastic way of life. I love reading stories about him and learning from his life. For all of you, your patron saints are part of your name. It's fun to look up something about your patron saint, to learn something about him or her and what he or she did in life and what they can teach us in our lives. Probably a good time for our owl to come down. We should have Pascal visit us, as he always does. And he always brings a message in his beak, which I think is so cute. He brings today two very simple things. We probably have heard these terms, the Ave Maria and the Pater Noster. Ave Maria is the Latin term for Hail Mary, and Pater Noster is the Latin term for Our Father. We don't use them very much, but you might have heard in movies or heard somebody say, I'll say an Ave for you. It means I'm going to say a Hail Mary for you. And the Pater Noster, we know it's the prayer that Jesus taught, the only prayer that Jesus taught and said, when you pray, say this. And hopefully we're using that. Hopefully we're using those simple prayers. Sometimes people get, oh, how shall I pray? Well, Jesus told us the basic way to pray is say the Our Father. People have loved that prayer for 2,000 years. And then there's the Hail Mary, which develops right out of the Bible, the angel Gabriel's message to Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace. We go to Mary in our need. Perhaps if I could leave you with a lesson, today in this, we're going through the whole virus thing. We're trying to get beyond it. We're trying to get our lives back into order. And there's a tendency to just say, oh, this is the way it's going to be. We're not going to get through this. We are. We are going to get through it. And we're going to get through it well. But we can't lose sight of our connection with God. And sometimes that connection is directly, like the Our Father. Sometimes that connection is through Mary. And sometimes that connection is through our patron saints. Maybe this week, learn something about your patron saint. Learn something about him or her. And go to God with him or her by your side. God bless you and have a wonderful, wonderful week.